This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. You've heard these messages from Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont. Connecticut is on the rebound. Businesses are moving to our state, and with them come new jobs. Yet Connecticut's workforce has contracted 8% from pre-pandemic levels in February of 2020. What programs and policies are needed to encourage investment to help Connecticut businesses launch and grow? This is where angel investors, debt financiers, and venture capitalists come in. Today, Where We Live, we focus on women-led funds and learn whether they're investing in Connecticut companies. Now, women-founded ventures in the U.S. raised $25 billion in venture capital in the first half of 2021. That might seem like a lot, but it's just 2.7% of the total venture capital funding pie. And across America, just 34 Black female founders raised $1 million in venture capital for their companies in 2018. Last year, that number shot up to 93 Black women, according to Project Diane. Joining us now is a Black woman founder of Realist Ventures, a Connecticut-based venture capital firm that funds women-founded minority businesses. You can also join our conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Share a comment on our Facebook page and find us on Twitter at Where We Live. Marie Rocha, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I mentioned you're founder, also general partner of Realist Ventures. So again, a venture capital firm in our state investing in startups at the development, seed, and early stages. So tell us, when you launched Realist in 2018, what was the catalyst?
For me, I had been working in this space, and I moved to Connecticut 11 years ago and embedded myself in the tech startup community as much as I could, but I wasn't seeing a lot of progress, especially at the check writing level, as well as funding for startups. And my partner and we talked about it for months and essentially decided to throw our hats in the space, and I've been really grateful for some of the opportunities to collaborate and just help with the ecosystem as much as possible.
So describe the ecosystem in Connecticut. I alluded to, we hear from policymakers that things are looking great, but you're the one, you and your partner and others that are in this space, looking for investors, looking to help businesses launch. And so how would you describe Connecticut's ecosystem?
It's interesting. I think for us, we've been really focused on women founders primarily, just because I think, when you look at the numbers, it remains the same. I think 3 or 4 years ago, we started talking about the Me Too movement, the lack of funding for women. Sadly, the numbers remain the same. It's still at less than 3%. Black founders tend to get a lot less. In fact, it's pretty sad that Black founders and founders of color get less than 1% of funding that goes to venture. So in Connecticut, I think it mirrors the rest of the country. What we've done is, we've partnered with as many people as we can. I started an incubator with Haven and Darien to try to help move the needle a little bit. We've host female-only pitch competitions to try to also help get more exposure. But in general, I think it's pretty siloed. Everyone's sort of doing their own thing and trying to really figure out what the right formula is. But I think there are a lot of opportunities here. So hopefully in time, we'll see some growth.
I want to talk more with you in just a little bit about the networking and Haven. But when we think about, as you mentioned, few women in venture capital, fewer women of color. So how did you get the math to work with your venture capital firm? And has it been difficult raising funds from high net worth investors?
Absolutely. For us, my partner and I, we had started out with investing. We thought no one would invest with us, so we just pull our resources together and started our fund. Later, a few male investors came on board. Unfortunately, they were just not the right match, and that's the difficulty for women. We can't just take, funding from LPs who are limited partners who are investors in funds who would normally just invest, because some of them have sort of like baggage that we have to overcome, like domestic violence and et cetera. So it's been more difficult, I think, for women, or at least for me, to fundraise, because I do want to retain the integrity, and I want to work with partners and investors who really want to fund underrepresented founders. And our portfolio, we focus on under-networked, Black, brown, white women. I mean, we kind of have a very diverse portfolio where 68% of our portfolio identify as marginalized group. But the problem with that is it's much harder to raise money. More and more limited partners are not as interested. I think they're coming around, but certainly not from Connecticut. I mean, it's hard to even book a meeting with high net worth individuals here, because they're certainly not looking for, fund like ours, who are really trying to work at this level.
And so you mentioned that challenge. So how do you work around it? Is it through this co-working venture that you launched, and others, just like trying to get a more robust network to help women-founded companies?
Yes, that's one way. The other, I do partner quite a bit with people outside of Connecticut. We have partners from Oklahoma and California, New York, where we're working on some projects to really primarily actually help with Connecticut. I'm creating a lab which we hope to attract more founders who will be interested in starting a startup but lacking the capital or the technical resources. So my partner and I, we were focusing on raising money for that too, in addition to our fund. This way, we'll be able to kind of like show more progress in terms of how the investors should look at this asset class. And the lab will include marketing, technical teams to help build projects and startups for founders who are non-technical. Wendy, who is on this call, will later tell you that's one of the issues we ran into with our incubator, where we had amazing women, but did not have the resources to help them take their projects to the next level by hiring a development team. And so that's one of the issues we've identified, and we think we have a plan to work and fix some of that. So that's one way. The other is through our network. We've built, I think, a fairly supportive network. I have a lot of support from, CI, who've been really helping to figure some of that out. And Christine Sullivan, who's with the SBA, and she's amazing at helping us coordinate as well. So we've been just partnering with as many people as we can to hopefully make some progress.
You mentioned CI. Are you referencing Connecticut Innovations, the state's venture capital fund?
Thank you. Yes, correct.
And you're hearing Marie Rocha here on Where We Live, founder and general partner of Realist Ventures, as we learn about women venture capital firms in our state helping to launch women-founded companies and others. You can join us if you have a question, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Before I hear from one of the women-founded companies that your venture capital firm has helped, tell us about what it's been like, what kind, how much money or how much have you been able to raise to date? What have been your returns and the companies that you're looking at?
So we primarily invest in biotech and software companies. We are industry agnostic, so as long as it's tech enabled, we're usually very interested with, obviously high growth and potential to be billion-dollar companies. So far, we've raised $6 million for our first fund, deployed all of it. We're raising our second fund now at 25 million. We have a lot of great interest. I hope they'll stick around. And our returns have been actually pretty impressive. Most of our founders have gone on to raise after our initial seed. So we invest at the very early stages. We've invested $3.5 million in a company based in Connecticut, Valisher. They've been responsible for some of the recalls with regards to sunscreen and most recently hand sanitizers. So we do have some great traction. It's just, I think overall, it's still hard, right? It's a woman, I'm a Black woman of color. I certainly don't have some of the networks some of my peers have in terms of high net worth individuals and, foundation and so on. But I think I remain very positive because it's harder to fundraise, but it's more exciting when I get a yes. So that's kind of like what's been driving. But separately, women like Wendy and many of the women that were part of our cohort for the incubator with Haven have sort of like reignited my passion around this. I think when you meet brilliant people who are working on great ideas and lack the opportunities or the network to raise money, it just kind of like helped me to sort of refocus and trying to come up with solution and models that will benefit those people. I think that's part of the problem. VC right now, venture capital right now, their pattern matching is very different than what I hope to model after, but it eliminates a lot of the brilliant people that could really contribute to society in general. And then separate from that is the lack of tech support. So we have invested in companies that are very much around building skill building. One of our companies, Career Karma, they raised a Series A last year. We also invested early on. Their startup is really focused around reskilling Americans into the workforce, into tech. So we're trying to make these strategic investments to kind of help our portfolio as well as eventually help founders as well along the line.
You mentioned Wendy Ward. She's founder and CEO of Futures Thrive, and you helped her through your women-focused co-working venture called Haven in Darien. Wendy Ward, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I mentioned Futures Thrive. Tell us about your company and how Haven was able to help you.
So Haven is a working space in Norwalk, Connecticut, and it's actually just been such a partner along the way in the entire journey in a pitch competition and then later the incubator. Great place for me to go. I was an individual working out of my house, trying to come up with a new solution for youth mental health screening, early assessment like we do for every other health condition as far as hearing and vision and blood pressure. We have all of those screenings for kids. We don't have mental health screening for kids. So to that end, I spent a lot of time working and on the phone, and Haven was just a great place for me to go and really expand my network.
You mentioned a little bit of the context behind Futures Thrive. And so, part of getting investors interested in your business is having a great story. And you had that personal connection, Wendy, but then taking it to the next level and finding the capital. Can you walk us through the difficulties of that?
Yeah. So I have to piggyback on what Marie said in the sense that while it's harder to raise money, it's so much more thrilling when you get that win, especially working on a socially positive work. So 10 years ago, my husband and I suffered the consequences of a child with an undiagnosed mental health condition. And that thrust me personally into learning everything I needed to know about mental health. And then that sort of expanded out in my world. I'm an active participant in my community, and people started to see that I had this knowledge base. So it grew and grew until the day when I realized what I know, everyone should know. And so we launched Futures Thrive, and I think the compelling nature of the work is that, especially where 80% of women make the healthcare choices for their family, and you look at, women aren't running healthcare companies, and then, of course, the statistics on women raising money, let alone for tech and healthcare companies, it was like, could I set myself up for a bigger mountain? But the compelling part of the work is that this screener that we're creating, which is 21st century screener for kids, it's in a gamified web-based platform, comes from a place of reality. And I think that's how a lot of women work. They work from, how would this need be solved? How could this solve the need in my household? And then the reality is that it can spread out and can web out to many, many households. So the work has been, I've never worked harder in my career, and I've never loved my job more.
You mentioned incubators. Marie, talk about the role of incubators because we know, so many new businesses fail, and so when a new venture is involved in an incubator, helping them stay focused, providing them mentorship as well as getting them connected to the right investors.
Yes, absolutely. It's very, very important for historically overlooked founders to have that kind of network and support. Even myself, there are moments where I've wanted to quit the space just because it's really difficult to fundraise and the frustration of not seeing more progress, especially as a woman. And so the incubators have been tremendous. And I think Wendy and I, we would have probably never met if she pitched for Hatch, which is another program I co-founded with Haven 2 years ago. And I was frustrated that she hadn't made more progress in terms of investment and et cetera. And then at that time, I was not fundraising and I was considering some other models to really support founders. And ultimately, I, this year decided to start fundraising again, just because I felt like I built enough traction. And while it can be scary and frustrating, it was important to stay involved and also really test out theories and opportunities to help people. So incubators are wonderful. Women especially haven't had such historical opportunities in the space. So I always encourage other women. I'm like one of those people who will, unfortunately, my kids will joke that even at, the supermarket, I'm constantly trying to convince a woman to start a business. But that's because I think that the more women who get into this space, the more opportunities we'll have. Women who can invest in other women, and because that's part of the problem. Most of the check writers are white men, which is fine, but unfortunately they tend to, back other white men. But if we get more women in the space, especially women of color, we can certainly increase the numbers of founders. And I do think that in general, the data is there. Women of color, or rather historically underrepresented and overlooked founders, tend to produce better results. And I see that in my own portfolio, where there are founders who most people didn't really think would succeed, and they have exceeded expectations. They're now raising Series Bs. And I think that that's what we want to see more. But the incubators and accelerators are essential to that, although those models, I think, can be tweaked a little bit, but definitely encourage more and more people to support those.
Wendy Ward, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's also important about the incubator model is that it just gives you education and support, that you're not alone. As a founder, it's nice to know that you can talk with people who are at the same time in company building as you, certainly a startup in Connecticut, but also it fills in gaps. As a founder, I come to the table with a lot of really positive attributes, but there are definitely things that I don't know. And as a woman, I'm willing to say I don't know what I don't know. And the incubator really was able to educate in areas where it just overall elevates the work.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the difficulty and how much money did you have to launch your company, Wendy?
So we are looking at $350,000 to raise to have a product in market this year. And we've scaled that in a number of different ways, but we've put together a really lean and mean model. We've raised $160,000. We have, with that, a prototype design, and we've begun development for the overall minimally viable product. We're still in the process of raising, and it's very encouraging. The state of Connecticut does, as Marie said, have a really great ecosystem. The small business development program I've just been able to take advantage of so many assets of the state of Connecticut when it comes to doing my work that I'm really proud to be a nutmegger.
Well, it's good to hear about your business, Wendy Ward, founder and CEO of Futures Thrive. Futures Thrive, a web-based app and metrics to diagnose mental health conditions in children during well visits. And Marie Rocha, thank you for joining us, founder and general partner of Realist Ventures, a Connecticut-based venture capital that invests in startups. We're going to continue talking after the break, hear from more women that lead investment groups, and we'll take your questions too. You can join us 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today we're talking about women-owned startups, incubators, and women-led investing groups. According to PitchBook, New York and San Francisco are the leading metro areas for female-founded companies. So what needs to change to help our state become a stronger place for women-led companies and investors? Joining us now on Zoom is Liddy Karter, managing partner of Mizzen Capital, a women-owned credit fund. Liddy, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Lucy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
So I mentioned you're a private credit fund. So for listeners, describe how you help entrepreneurs and what kind of businesses.
We invest in companies that have under 100 million in revenues and probably more than 5 million. So just beyond what Wendy is doing, when a company has had their Series A, for instance, and they have a product and they have customers, but they need to grow. We help with the growth. And that's so important because, frankly, the dollars are larger and it's hard to attract that capital before you have a long track record of success. If you're a company with several hundred million in revenues, there are a lot of people ready to step up. But the smaller companies still have a challenge, and that's particularly true of women and minority-owned businesses. We invest in companies that we think will be most successful, regardless of who owns them. But as it turns out, that because we are a 100% women-owned fund, we tend to see, and minority-owned, we tend to see more companies that are women and minority-owned because of our networks. And that's just the way our part of the market works, in the same way that if we were 100% white male founded and owned, we'd probably see more of those companies. So it's not surprising that my last funds had 22% women and minority owned companies as companies in which we'd invested, all in Connecticut, by the way. We invested in Greenworks Lending, run by Cooley, who we're going to talk to later. Kat Berkey Inc., run by Kat Berkey. It's a women's cosmetics company or skincare company. Pen Globe Lighting, run by Marsha LaFemina. And we've recently invested in Stay Pineapple Hotels, run by Michelle Barnett. That's actually in New York. These are all companies that are growing, that have women founders, that we identified with strongly, and the companies have done really well. But the reason I actually mention the names is that I often hear from my fellow fund investors that they simply can't find women-owned companies. And I just think they're looking in the wrong places. There are 40% of our market is of companies, 350,000 companies in the U.S. designated as the lower middle market, under 100 million in revenues. 40% of those are owned by women and minorities. There's got to be a few of them that are investable.
Right. Now, I understand formerly you were CFO of NetKey, where you raised $15 million in institutional venture capital. When we started the show, we talked about how a lot of the VC funding really, there's not much, when you think about the whole percentage that went to women-owned or women-founded firms. So can you talk about, how you encounter gender-based challenges when raising funds and, how that's changed, if at all?
Sure. And I'll say it's an inscrutable process. Fundraising is just hard. It doesn't matter who you are. It's a hard process. My very first company was a company called Resource Recovery Systems, recycling bottles, cans, paper, and plastics, located in Essex, Connecticut. And I was the CEO, and I had an impossible time raising capital. But I did go to banks, and banks ended up financing us because we had plenty of collateral, not because anyone believed that we were going to grow a great business, which we did. So it wasn't venture capital that we landed at the time. The next company, which was Netkey, I was CFO of, and we also had a hard time. However, one day, Marilyn Adler, who is my current partner at Mizzen Capital, 20 years later, we became financing partners. But at that point, she was instrumental in leading the round, the first venture capital round. And I think if she hadn't gotten over the fact that I had my son's tricycle in the corner of my office and understood that I was pretty ambitious and was going to make it successful along with the team, we wouldn't have gotten that funding. We had been talking to dozens of VCs. And suddenly a woman walked in, and she was unusual. There aren't many women in venture capital, and in 1998 there were even fewer. So that made all the difference for me. We stayed friends, and here we are years later, investing together. And while we don't invest with a gender lens or a racial lens or an ethnic lens, we love women-owned and minority-owned businesses because they tend to be slightly overlooked, and they consequently maybe work a little harder. Any woman or minority that succeeds as a company founder and developer is an outlier. And you want to invest in those outliers because they're the people typically with the most ambition.
You're hearing Liddy Karter, managing partner of Mizzen Capital, a women-owned credit fund, as we talk about what the ecosystem looks like here in our state. You can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Katie's calling in from Willimantic with a question. Katie, go ahead.
Hi, women. I am so grateful and excited to be a part of this conversation. And I am actually in the very early stages of founding We Hear Her, which is going to serve women's mental health and wellness, specifically from a telehealth platform. And I am looking to focus on underserved communities of women and women in the fertility, peri, and postpartum period of life. Lots of alliteration there. So my question is, how do I reach out and connect with this incubator that you were referring to earlier, Wendy, and discussing with Maria?
So we were talking to Marie Rocha, and she'd helped with the Venture Haven in Darien. So we can get that information to you. I'll just make sure the call screener writes down your phone number. But Liddy, did you want to respond to the other points that she made about the venture that she's hoping to launch?
Sure. I think there are, fortunately for everyone, there are a lot of incubators today, and Maria's is one great one. Another few that to think about, one is called Golden Seeds. It invests just in women-owned companies, women-owned and managed companies. And another that's recently launched in Connecticut is called Tidal River. And Allison Malloy is involved in that, and you can reach her at Connecticut Innovations. And they're focusing on women-led companies just in Connecticut. So those are two really great resources for growing. And then there's the National Women's Development Center, Women's Development Center in Stamford, Connecticut. Very effective organization to help you build your business plan and get to a point where venture is able to step in.
So, Liddy, getting back to Mizzen Capital, how much has Mizzen invested so far? And again, how many Connecticut companies are we talking about?
We're a new platform. A new fund. We recently launched in December of 2020. My last funds were also here in Connecticut, and we invested about $100 million in this iteration in Mizzen Capital. I'm pleased to say that we have invested about $90 million in 9 months. And of those, unfortunately, only one is a Connecticut company, but it is a great company founded by Al Sabloy. It's called Butterfly, and they work on energy efficiency as a service. And we think that one of our investment premises is that we invest in sustainable, socially responsible businesses that will generate the highest return for our investors. And that certainly is one that we believe will be a home run And it's great to see guys like Al. I think he's on his third or fourth business here in Connecticut, growing a really effective new business because he's an expert on building successful companies.
I wanted to bring into the conversation a woman that Liddy invested previously in Connecticut. Alexandra Cooley is Chief Investment Officer and co-founder of Greenworks Lending, which was bought by Nuveen earlier this year. Alexandra, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So I mentioned Greenworks Lending, but you previously, I believe, worked at the Connecticut Green Bank. And so how did that experience help you launch Greenworks?
Yeah, great question. So in 2012, I was coming out of business school at Yale, and I really wanted to do something in my career that was going to have an impact in climate change. I had this realization when I was out of college that I'm going to be spending 50% of my waking hours at work, and I really wanted that to have a significant impact on climate change. So when coming out of business school, the opportunity to join this kind of new, essentially it's a state agency in Connecticut that Governor Malloy had set up to create innovative structures to bring private capital into the state, really with the goal of funding more clean energy upgrades in the state of Connecticut. I was really excited about that opportunity. And my first day there, I actually met my now co-founder, Jessica Bailey. And her background was that she had spent about a decade prior at a nonprofit passing something called Property Assessed Clean Energy Policy nationwide, and had come to the Green Bank to really see if she could get a program going here in Connecticut. And when I learned about CPACE from her, a light bulb really went off, and I saw that it could be a really exciting business. And the reason is that the US commercial real estate market is about a $16 trillion market. And it accounts for roughly 20 to 30% of the carbon emissions here in the state. But the average commercial building in the US is over 50 years old, and about 80% of these properties don't have great access to financing. And that's really important because when you think about clean energy upgrades, you're asking people to invest a fair bit of money up front for small but durable energy savings over time. And if you're a commercial building owner, that's not typically a bet you want to make. Typically, you're looking at a payback cycle of 5 years maximum. And if you're looking at a 10, 15-year payback measure, that's not going to make the cut. And so it's really a problem that financing solves, but the problem with the commercial real estate market is that it's so diverse. So if you think about what commercial real estate is, it's everything from a Ford dealership in Connecticut that's been owned by the same family for decades to a high-rise 23-story midtown office building in New York to kind of a garden-style 50-unit apartment building outside of DC. By the way, all of those are deals that we financed, but prior to CPACE, there was really no standardization. And for me, it was really exciting to find a tool that created that standardization. So going back to the Green Bank, we essentially figured out what this product needed to look like at the Green Bank, really supported by the state. And then in 2015, we kind of looked at each other and said, okay, we figured out that there is a market, that people want this financing. And then the other side of that was figuring out who wants these loans. And we took the bet that there was going to be a lot of excitement, especially from places like insurance companies and pension funds, if we got enough volume. And that bet paid off. So along the way, we had a lot of help from investors like Liddy. And we were able to aggregate a portfolio of these assets and go out and do the first ever securitization of this type of asset class, commercial property assessed clean energy, which really unlocked the market. And so since we did that in 2017, there's been about $1 billion of this product created. Hundreds of properties have been upgraded, and we've been able to grow the company. So we're now almost 70 people, with about 40% of us based here in Connecticut.
Well, that's great. And you told me I can call you Allie. Again,
Yeah.
Allie Cooley, Chief Investment Officer and co-founder of Greenworks Lending. I asked our other guests, and I wanted to ask you, as a woman co-founder, what were some of the gender-specific challenges in attracting capital did you face as we talk about a male-dominated VC world?
It's a really great question. And I would echo what Liddy said, which is that raising money is hard no matter who you are. And when we started, we were raising money for not only a new company, not only a new product, but really a new industry. And so investors had to consider not just if they were backing the right team, but if it was the right time, if it's the right market. And so it's really hard to separate that experience as two women founding this company from operating in a brand new sector. But that being said, we do operate at the nexus between commercial real estate and structured finance. So investors weren't necessarily used to seeing many opportunities originated by women, goes without saying. And I will say that we did once have an investor ask if we were going to use their money to redecorate our offices, which, needless to say, we didn't end up selecting them as investors. We were lucky to have many options when we went to raise money. And what's interesting is when I look back at that experience raising money and I look at who ended up giving us money, to echo what Marie said, it's really striking. Over 70% of the money we raised came from women managed funds. And since 2015, up until we were purchased by Nuveen in April, we raised over $1 billion of equity and debt. 70% of that came from women managed funds. And I think that that's really striking when you think about the level of female representation in fund managers. You mentioned the 2.5% of women that manage VC funds. It's about 14% in the debt space. So it's a really, really striking number.
We were talking about, what some of the other challenges are in operating a business out of Connecticut. Sometimes it's even just starting with the confidence to just launch and get involved in these networking groups. Amy tweeted that this is a timely topic for her. She's been itching to start up a business, paralyzed by indecision, overwhelmed by fear, not sure what I need to push me in the right direction. So do you have advice for her? And I'll ask Liddy the same. Go ahead, Allie.
It's funny. First of all, I would say if you feel passionately about something, you should do it. Just do it because your conviction will get you there, to Liddy's point. And I think it touches on something else. And I think when we talk about all these numbers, the fact that Marie's LPs are mostly women as well, the fact that Liddy sees so many of her companies be women owned and run, I think there's actually something subtle here because in looking at a lot of studies around imposter syndrome, there's so many studies, study after study shows that the majority of women in the workplace are affected by what's called imposter syndrome, which is that you don't feel like you deserve to be where you are. I think one study even showed 85% of women in the workplace suffer from this. And I think if you're someone that's gone through that and gotten to the other side, you see some of the behaviors as proof that the entrepreneur in front of you is really passionate about her cause. And it's hugely important to her. But if you haven't ever experienced that, it's really easy to interpret the nervousness as a lack of confidence. And so what I would say to this caller is, if you have conviction on something, the nervousness is a signal that it's important to you. And I would push through and take the plunge.
And Liddy, Karter, do you have some last words for this person who tweeted at us?
Yes, I think just do it is exactly what Allie's saying. I reiterate that because it's easy to not do it. And the downside of not doing it is so much greater than the downside of doing it. If you do it and it doesn't work out, you'll learn a lot. And you'll get a lot of support in the process. So just do it.
That's Liddy Karter, managing partner of Mizzen Capital. And you also heard from Alexandra Cooley, Chief Investment Officer and co-founder of Greenworks Lending, which was bought by Nuveen. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. Coming up, we hear from a woman who leads a group involved in a group that invests money in startup companies. Do you have questions about angel investors? Join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Now, we've been hearing from and learning about women venture capitalists. We heard from women private investors. Angel investors help start up businesses. Joining us now is Marianne Rooke. She's on Zoom with us, President and Managing Director of the Angel Investor Forum. Marianne, welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the Angel Investor Forum and how many of your members are women investors?
Well, very good question. We are working on increasing our women members. Angel Investor Forum was founded in 2004, and we have Liddy Karter on that you just heard from, and she was one of the co-founders back in 2004. So Liddy's been driving investments in startup companies for a very long time. And I joined in 2005 via Liddy. Her cousin introduced me, and I had just moved back to Connecticut from Silicon Valley after being out there 20 years. And it was, I credit Liddy for connecting me into the startup ecosystem here in Connecticut, because coming from the West Coast to the East Coast didn't have that network. And so, again, thank you, Liddy. And I think one of the things that you'll hear throughout this whole program is that women are always helping women getting connected into the network, and especially what's so very well needed is the access to capital. With AIF, we probably have only about 12% of our members are women. We have about 50 members, mostly from Connecticut, and we have some from Massachusetts and New York as well. We invest in early stage companies, not only Connecticut companies, but we like the Northeast, but we do love Connecticut companies to invest in because of the angel investor tax credit that is available here in Connecticut, and we can talk more about that. Both Liddy and I worked on getting that legislation in back in 2012, 13. And so we are always looking for women accredited investors to join our group. So if there's anyone out there that is interested just in attending a meeting and learning about it, we'd love to have you, because we invest in companies, and we like to see more women founders as well, because we do invest in women founders.
Marianne, when you talk about investing, so what's the average size of your investment when we're talking about angel investing?
Most angels will invest $25,000 individually. And just so that folks kind of understand this space, angel investing, people are investing their own money. They're accredited investors based on the SEC guidelines. And through that, they'll invest $25,000. And especially here in Connecticut, because of the angel investor tax credit, the minimum investment is $25,000, and then the angel will get a 25% tax credit on their Connecticut taxes in the year they invest, or carry it forward for 5 years. So that's why Connecticut companies are especially attractive to our angel group, because it helps to de-risk the investment right away by taking advantage of the angel investor tax credit. And for a Connecticut company, being able to offer to investors that tax credit really makes them quite attractive, even for investors outside the state, because again, they have access to the tax credit as well.
So when we're talking about your investors that are part of Angel Investor Forum, so what kind of businesses are they interested in?
We invest in a wide range of businesses from, I think in the early days, it was very much software. Our very first investment, and Liddy was very involved in this, was Design to Launch, which was a women-led business. Allison Malloy, who you've heard her name before, she's works at Connecticut Innovations now, and is also one of the driving forces with Annie Lamont Lamont to develop the new group Tidal River, which is for investing in women-led businesses here in Connecticut. And so that was our very first investment in a women business. And our recent investment is in a company in Farmington, Torigen, which is in the veterinary oncology space. And Ashley Kalinauskas is the founder of that company, and that's a very promising company. And so those two are, software, biotech. We invest in medical device, a variety. We do quite a bit of biotech companies, which is great because Connecticut is developing a very strong ecosystem in the biotech. But we also invest in consumer products, which is a kind of a new area that we've been investing in. Better Roads in Madison is our recent investment by our Angel Investor Fund 3. We have a fund as well. So that is one thing to, share with you is that angel investors invest in a variety of ways. They might invest individually, like our members do, plus some angel groups also have a fund. And so we have a fund that our angel investors have the opportunity to buy a unit in. And then as a group, we decide, we vote, and majority of the vote allows an investment in a company. And investments...
Marianne, we just have a couple of minutes left, but I have to ask you, given that you're intimately aware of what it's like to work in Silicon Valley, now you're in Connecticut, what can Connecticut do better?
Connecticut has all the same ingredients that Silicon Valley has. Great universities, really smart people, passionate, and a great way of life here. I think what's we need to put more and have access to more money. And I think with one of the things that's, if you think about it, if we only have one angel group, Angel Investor Forum, and then another one that's getting started, which I'm thrilled about, is the Tidal River. We need more angel investors to invest money in early stage startups, because without that first money in after friends and family, it's hard to really continue to boost up the ecosystem and grow the ecosystem. I mean, Boston and New York have done excellent jobs, and we syndicate with them with deals and share, which means we all invest alongside each other to help a company raise a couple $1 million. So we need to get more angel investors in Connecticut so that boosting and investing in our own backyard.
And how can the state of Connecticut help with that? Or is a lot of this on these private networks that have been developed, Marianne?
It may not be people may not be so aware of it, but Connecticut Innovations has been just an outstanding leader in investing in early stage companies. And Governor Malloy and now Governor Lamont have been super supportive of making sure that that organization is a leader throughout, and they have national recognition now as being investors in early stage companies. So Connecticut Innovations is doing a superb job. We just need more individual investors to invest alongside them in Connecticut companies, as well as attracting more venture capital firms from outside of Connecticut to set up their offices here in Connecticut, so that we can continue to fund companies at whatever stage they are at, whether it's early stage or they're Series A, Series B, Series C. We really need more eyeballs on Connecticut companies.
Well, Marianne Rooke, thank you for joining us here on Where We Live, President and Managing Director of the Angel Investor Forum. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Sujata Srinivasan. I'll be back tomorrow.